It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. A double defeat and a near-record retreat of voters from his party. But the Prime Minister insists the next election isn't yet lost.
No one expected us to win here, but Steve's victory demonstrates that when confronted with the actual reality of the Labour Party, when there's an actual choice on a matter of substance at stake, people vote Conservative.
Labour's leader loses in London but hails a huge win in Yorkshire, while the Liberal Democrats advance again in their former heartland. And why green politics may be proving a red rag to some voters after Just Stop Oil and London's controversial new controls on cars. Also tonight, vindication for the former patients of a controversial mental health unit, now closing down after an investigation by Sky News. We go inside the floating home, which will soon house 500 asylum seekers. The Lionesses getting ready to roar. England train ahead of their opening World Cup match, now just hours away.
I've got you under my skin.
The crooner's crooner, Tony Bennett, the man praised by Sinatra, dies at 96. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. Rishi Sunak was less than 500 votes from a by-election triple whammy last night, and only saved by the backlash against a low-emissions scheme, first conceived by Boris Johnson when he was London's mayor. The anti-ULEZ fallout meant that though the Conservatives lost thousands of votes in Uxbridge in West London, they held on to the seat. There were, though, huge swings against them elsewhere, benefiting Labour in Selby and Ainsty and the Liberal Democrats in Somerton and Frome. In response, the Prime Minister said the next election isn't yet a done deal. Tonight, we'll profile the disquiet, amongst some voters at least, against some headline green policies. But first, our political editor, Beth Rigby, reports.
I hereby declare that Keir Mather is duly elected.
One Keir delivering for another. A historic win here in Selby for Keir Starmer's Labour. This once-safe Tory seat switching sides.
I understand the enormity of what has just happened. We have rewritten the rules on where Labour can win.
Marching on after Labour secured its second biggest ever by-election swing. This a big step on their way to the general election.
You voted for change. You put your trust in the Labour Party. And we hear you. We will deliver that change. We will see politics as a force for good with the next Labour government.
But the swing in Selby not repeated down south for Labour, as Uxbridge in West London, Boris Johnson's former seat, stayed blue on the back of local issues. The London Mayor's decision to expand a tax on polluting vehicles to this patch, punishing Labour.
This wasn't the campaign Labour expected, and Keir Starmer and his Mayor Sadiq Khan need to sit up and listen to the Uxbridge and South Ruislip residents. Thank you.
Rishi Sunak just clinging on here. But this a PM that knows his days could be numbered.
Westminster's been acting like the next election's a done deal. The Labour Party's been acting like it's a done deal. The people of Uxbridge just told all of them that it's not. By-elections, mid-term for an incumbent government are always difficult. They rarely win them. The message I take away is that we've got to double down. Brilliant. How are you?
But these results clear.
Oh, that is fantastic.
His current trajectory looking more fatal than fantastic. Down in Somerton and Frome in Somerset, Sunak's first by-election blow of the night. This a long-time Lib Dem Conservative battleground. But the Tory vote share here dropping to a new low.
3, 2, 1.
Ed Davey hopeful that his fourth consecutive by-election steal from the Tories will help blast his party back into serious play in dozens of seats.
I'm focusing on the next general election, and nothing is going to distract me from that job. We have to get rid of this appalling Conservative government. People feel so let down. They're ruining our country. Nothing works in the United Kingdom anymore.
In the end, it was 2-1 instead of 3-0 against Rishi Sunak, which at least gave him a life jacket to cling on to in the by-election wash-up. But it can't protect him from the other two by-election results, what the local elections showed us and what national polling is suggesting, that the Conservatives remain on course to go under at the next general election. Sunak in deep electoral trouble with so much ground to make up between now and the general election. It is perhaps an insurmountable task. What's more certain is that it will be a vicious fight. Beth Rigby, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, what was common across all three by-elections was a significant swing against the Conservatives. Steve Tuckwell held Uxbridge and South Ruislip for the Conservatives with a majority of 495. But that majority was sharply down on Boris Johnson's in the same seat, the Conservative share of the vote falling 7.5%. The biggest swings against the Conservatives, though, happened in the other seats. In Somerton and Frome, Sarah Dyke won for the Liberal Democrats with a majority of more than 11,000. Their vote share was up 28% as the Conservative vote collapsed. And in Selby and Ainsty, Labour's Keir Mather won a more than 4,000 majority with another huge swing. The Conservatives' vote share again collapsed by 26%. And the result here at the top of the list, the largest majority overturned by Labour at a by-election since 1945. So why did people switch their support in such large numbers? And can the Conservatives win them back? Our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, has been speaking to people in Selby.
In this corner of North Yorkshire, meet the voters that wanted the Tories out.
Yes!
The people that helped make Labour history.
Well, I've voted Conservative all my life, but I couldn't bring myself to vote.
Look at the damage the Conservative Party have done to the whole country. It's massive. It's going to take a long time for the country to recover.
Tory turmoil, a gift for the 25-year-old who's now a Labour MP.
Do you know who this is?
Oh, yeah, it's young Keir.
That's right, the
Yeah.
new Labour MP.
Yes.
25 years old.
Yes. So we'll have a bit of going in, will.
And a proud moment for any mum.
I just have the inner confidence that he will succeed, and he just does. We just take it in our stride, really. It is very nice for him, but he'll just take it in his stride.
And what next? Future Prime Minister?
Why not? Never say never.
The sense you got from number 10 is that this was a constituency Rishi Sunak really wanted to hold on to. He came here himself to visit Selby during the campaign. His own constituency in Richmond, North Yorkshire, isn't all that far away. The big question now, though, is are these Labour votes here to stay? But by-election blues could roll into the next general election. When the whole country goes to the polls, Rishi Sunak will need seats like this.
Our ex-MP for the Selby area did not do the Conservatives any favours.
So you think people wanted to punish Conservatives?
Yeah.
Do you think Labour will hold on to those votes
No.
in the general election?
No, no chance.
Thanks very much.
To be good for the government. They're rarely this bad. Labour made history today. But will Parliament's youngest MP survive the real test the next time the public vote here?
In a word, your mood?
Ecstatic.
Ali Fortescue, Sky News, Selby.
Well, the Green Party may not have featured at the top of the leaderboard for last night's by-election results, but Green politics appears to be becoming problematic for the main parties. Labour's leader blamed its loss in Uxbridge on the low-emission ULEZ scheme, and some senior figures are now suggesting there needs to be a rethink. And then, of course, there's Just Stop Oil back on the streets and a golf course today, as our science and technology editor Tom Clark reports.
The reaction of the crowd said it all. This tournament isn't open to climate activists. The arrest of the Just Stop Oil campaigners met with cheers.
Your procession in the road causes serious disruption.
Not that bothers the group, who are also holding up traffic in London.
We're not trying to be popular. We are trying to get this demand of no new oil and gas to be popular. So if people support the cause and they don't support the tactics, that's great. It's all about the cause.
The sense of urgency that motivates climate protesters like Just Stop Oil is entirely justified by the science of what's going on with the world's climate right now. But on the streets of the UK at the moment, their crisis is running headlong into another one, and that's that the British public has never been this poor in a generation and understandably feels they can't afford to deal with this right now.
I think it's outrageous. I mean, I'm in an electric vehicle. Would they stop me?
I think the idea is correct, but I think the way they're going about it is incorrect.
Just Stop Oil isn't the only frustration. Opposition to London's ultra-low emission zone is credited with the Conservatives' unexpected victory in the Uxbridge by-election.
The policy to expand the ultra-low emission zone is the right one. It was a difficult decision to take, but just like nobody would accept drinking dirty water, why accept dirty air?
The Mayor is doubling down, but senior Labour figures are now saying the ULEZ needs a rethink. And after their Uxbridge win, Conservatives could well be persuaded that opposing such schemes could help secure votes. After years of cross-party support, could climate policies become electoral kryptonite?
There are some Conservatives who are worried that net zero could be an electoral liability, but that is a small number. And I think what's happened in politics and over the last year or two is that cost of living issues have skyrocketed in terms of being the public's #1 concern. But that doesn't mean they no longer want environmental action.
We're already well into what could be the hottest recorded year on planet Earth. Securing the radical and rapid change that's needed to avoid even greater extremes requires serious consensus. Right now, that seems like it's slipping away. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Our political editor Beth Rigby's in Downing Street for us tonight. And Beth, Rishi Sunak says the next election isn't a done deal, but how do the Conservatives think they can change the narrative? What do they need to do?
Well, look, I think going into these by-elections, there's been a sense in Westminster that Rishi Sunak really is the captain of a sinking ship. As one former cabinet minister said to me only this week, we are in the death throes, is how he described it. And actually, when you look at the big swings in both Somerton and Selby, that doesn't change the general trend. In fact, it reaffirms it. But there is a glimmer of something, a raft for Rishi Sunak in these by-election results. Labour and the Conservatives think in different ways. I think for the Sunak team, the fact that they could destabilise Labour effectively on the row over ULEZ makes them think that if they can sharpen political tacks against Keir Starmer on wedge issues, on divisive issues, be that transgender debate, be that green issues, be that the policy on small boats, that they can destabilise Labour, that they can put doubt into voters' minds about the Labour Party, that they can attack, as they described to me, the grey man of Keir Starmer, who doesn't really give voters information about what he really thinks. I think for Labour, in a way, Uxbridge was kind of helpful, and the reason I say that is it allows Keir Starmer to say to his party, we need to keep laser focus, we need to maintain discipline, we need to remember that votes are conditional, we need to remember that this is not in the bag. So if that sets out the strategy for the two parties, what are the tactics? Well, I think we're now leaving this place for summer recess, but it's going to get busy in September. We're going to be looking at 2 reshuffles for both parties as they reset their teams onto election footing. I think for the Conservatives, Rishi Sunak will see party conference as an attempt to reset, to inject some energy into what has been a stuttering premiership to date. And I think for Labour, we will see the retail policies. It's going to get very busy. We are going onto election footing in September, and it's going to get very lively and very vicious.
Oh, Beth, thank you. Well, it feels like finally someone has listened. The mother of one of the former patients of a controversial mental health unit told Sky News today after it was confirmed it will close down. A Sky News investigation revealed a litany of allegations over the treatment of vulnerable young people at Taplow Manor in Berkshire. A warning that our community correspondent Lisa Holland's report includes some of the former patients' testimonies.
Broke me, made things worse, and I don't think I'm the only one.
They were treated worse than animals. There was screaming, there was alarms going off, there was blood on the walls.
These are some of the disturbing testimonies from young people and their families alleging failures in the care they received. For months, we investigated mental health units run by a single provider, the Huntercombe Group, speaking to more than 50 former patients. Now, Taplow Manor Hospital in Berkshire is to close after the NHS stopped admitting patients.
I can see the walls, I can smell it, I can hear it, I can feel people on me.
Amber and others complained of over-restraint and inadequate staffing, leaving them at increased risk of self-harm. Her family say she was left traumatised.
I'm now part of a campaign group which are all the survivors of the Huntercombe Hospital stories that Sky News uncovered along with The Independent, and we've all connected, and so we have become a we. It's no longer an I. So we just feel really, really emotional because on one hand there's this relief that it feels like finally someone has listened.
A spokesperson for the current owners, Active Care Group, said Active Care Group has taken the difficult decision to close its Taplow Manor Hospital due to a change in strategic direction. Active Care Group has worked with our patients' families and their relevant multidisciplinary teams to assist in the safe transfer or discharge of all Taplow Manor patients.
I mean, the news is clearly welcome, but long overdue. And I think it really does beg questions about the oversight, scrutiny, monitoring and inspection of privately run mental health settings.
Prince, come here.
Our investigation prompted calls for an examination of patient safety. The government has now announced a review of inpatient mental health services in England. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
It's far from luxurious. Sky News was today able to go aboard and see the conditions on board the barge, the Bibby Stockholm, which will be used to accommodate up to 500 asylum seekers from later this month. There are shared twin rooms, an outdoor exercise space and spaces to watch television and use the internet. Sky's Dan Whitehead reports from Dorset.
Arriving at the Bibby Stockholm and you'd be forgiven for thinking this is a floating prison. 20-foot-high metal fences surround the barge that'll soon be home to 500 male asylum seekers. On board, and we get the first look at what life will be like. The majority will stay in ensuite twin rooms, each equipped with a bunk bed and a TV. They are basic and functional. There is a gym with a range of exercise equipment, as well as an IT room, which will provide Wi-Fi and computers.
The facilities are designed to minimise the need for the asylum seekers to actually leave. So as well as their bedrooms, there are communal areas where they can watch TV and movies, and also internal outside space where there's going to be things like basketball hoops and benches for them to relax outside.
But the migrants, who'll be towards the end of their claims, will be free to come and go into Weymouth, with a range of local activities being lined up.
As you can see yourself, it isn't a floating prison. They've got multiple recreational areas and outside areas to be able to have activities. We've also got local voluntary services who are looking at what activities can happen outside of the barge. So things such as football and other activities like hiking and potentially looking at allotments and things like that.
It's an example of the government's failure to deal with the immigration situation that we're in.
Outside the port, the barge continues to divide.
Regardless of the fact that they have a gym and 3 sofas in their lounge, it's a prison, isn't it? It is technically a prison, or a slightly glorified version of a prison.
The government hopes the barge and former military sites will house around 3,000 asylum seekers by the autumn. But that's a fraction of the 50,000 in hotels right now. And with more arriving, finding them a safe place, often against local opposition, is an increasingly difficult challenge. Dan Whitehead, Sky News, in Portland, Dorset.
The Ukrainian ambassador to the UK has been dismissed from his role. It's been reportedly linked to what he said on Sky News about President Zelensky's response to Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who said that Ukraine needed to show gratitude and that the UK was not an Amazon delivery service for weapons. Vadim Pristeko told Sky News that the sarcastic tone of his president was not healthy. Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages have now been retrieved from his old phone and will be handed over to the COVID inquiry, unredacted, after technical experts recovered the information. They had been the subject of a legal challenge from the Cabinet Office. Officers scouring the outskirts of Berlin for a lioness now believe the mysterious animal is actually a wild boar. Heat-seeking equipment has been used in the search, but no evidence of a big cat has been found. More than 3 billion people eat rice as a staple food across the world, but getting hold of cheap supplies could be in danger after India introduced a partial ban on exports. The country sends millions of tons abroad each year. And along with restrictions on Ukrainian grain because of the war, it's led to concern that the world's poorest people could suffer. Sky's Neville Lazarus reports from Delhi.
Here at the Singla rice mills, they have stock, but cannot sell to some of the most vulnerable. The rice they export is to countries in Africa. Another staple food on the brink of a global crisis, as the world's largest rice exporter, India, imposes a ban, triggering fears of shortage and price rises across the world.
There's a huge demand in the domestic market also, so it will not let the price go down. Banning it will affect the prices in the importing countries, yes. They will not be able to get the good amount of rice from the world because India is a major supplier of this rice.
Torrential rains and floods in northern India have devastated large regions where rice is grown, compounding the fears and a factor instrumental in the ban.
The surge in food prices in the last few months, and in particular rice, which has gone up 12%, has put inflationary pressure on household incomes. The government under a lot of criticism for this and is trying to control it by bringing on this ban.
Over 3 billion people rely on rice as a staple in their diet. 40% of the world's exports come from India. That's around 22 million tons last year. The ban will cover non-basmati white rice, which makes up almost half that, a move that is sure to push prices higher. Global food supplies have already been hit due to the war in Ukraine. Russia has bombed warehouses and pulled out of a deal to let Ukraine export grain through the Black Sea, fueling fresh fears of a looming crisis for those in urgent need.
It's a matter of threat to their future and the future of their children and their families. They're not sad, they're angry, they're worried, they're concerned. Some will go hungry, some will starve, many may die.
In India, spiraling food inflation has emerged as a major risk to household incomes. But global price insecurity may come at a cost to the most at risk, living in some of the poorest countries in the world. Neville Lazarus, Sky News, Haryana.
Now, after winning the European Championships, England are one of the favourites for the World Cup, and the Lionesses kick off their campaign in Australia tomorrow. Their boss, Serena Wigman, says they'll do everything they can to bring the trophy home, as Nicole Johnston reports from Brisbane.
The countdown is on, only hours out from England taking on Haiti in Brisbane, as they begin their quest to win the World Cup.
Yeah, we have, of course, we have a whole team behind us to analyse the opponents. So we know, I think we know everything what we need to know about Haiti. Yes, what you say, we have never played them, so we have to experience that. But we are very well prepared. And yeah, I don't think there's any stone unturned in preparation for this game.
It hasn't all been about football. Money too. Players want to be paid bonuses. This tournament's prize money is a quarter of the Men's World Cup.
Yeah, obviously it's not a situation everyone wants to be in, but I think as players we're not just programmed to play football. Sometimes we have to have these conversations, but we have a very professional group and football is always at the front of everything.
Over the next month, 2 billion people, a quarter of the world's population, tuning in to the biggest sporting event for women ever held. England's World Cup dreams start in this stadium. A year ago, they took the nation along with them, winning the European Championships. So expectations are high. Can they take the trophy home? This fan thinks so. Far from home, but English all the way.
Yeah, we're really excited to see them tomorrow night. Should be a big crowd. I think they've sold over 40,000 tickets, so can't wait for the atmosphere tomorrow. Big build-up tomorrow through the day, and yeah, it's fantastic to have them here.
There's a sense of stillness about an empty stadium. But on Saturday, as the Lionesses run onto the field, a roar from the crowd will signal it's game on. Nicole Johnston, Sky News, Brisbane.
Well, it's been a superb day for England at Old Trafford as they gave themselves a chance to beat the rain and beat Australia in the 4th test. Johnny Bairstow produced a brilliant knock of 99 runs, but he was denied a test century after England were all out for 592. Mark Wood claimed crucial late wickets to leave Australia 113 before, at the end of day 3, a considerable 162 runs behind. Now, it takes quite a singer to outdo Frank Sinatra, but in the eyes of Old Blue Eyes, Tony Bennett was that man. He said the crooner was the best in the business. He died today, aged 96, and had given his last performance just last year. Mark Stone looks back on his life.
I've got you under my skin.
He always said he would never stop singing.
I've got you deep in the heart of me.
And so it was that not all that long ago, with a voice that crossed generations, Tony Bennett was still going. His death, 2 weeks short of his 97th birthday, will touch young and old and no doubt introduce yet more to that voice.
How do you keep the music playing?
It was back in 1962 when he released the song that would become his signature.
I left my heart in San Francisco.
A New Yorker to the core, he was born Anthony Dominic Benedetto in August 1926, and it was a slow start, interrupted by war. A front row seat in hell, he would later say of the front line in France. It was entertainer Bob Hope who made him, and made him change his name. Tony Bennett it was to be.
Chicago is.
Advised by his producer not to imitate Sinatra, in the end the two would become close friends, Sinatra saying Bennett was the best singer in the business. In the 60s and 70s, as rock and roll changed the landscape, there was management pressure for him to change too. These were his hardest years. He suffered from a drug addiction and he didn't want to change, but it turned out he didn't need to.
Let me sing forevermore.
His style, his voice, they were timeless.
It's hard to conceive it, a little ordinary thing. Will I go from rags to riches?
Reflecting, Elton John said, without doubt, the classiest singer, man and performer you will ever see. He's irreplaceable. It was Alzheimer's which stopped him in the end. His wife, Susan, was at his side when he died.
Will shine for me.
Mark Stone, Sky News.
Tony Bennett, who's died at the age of 96. That was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this story on the front of the Mail that says that Rishi Sunak is being told to go true blue or face wipeout. Tonight, I'm going to be joined by Conservative Home's Deputy Editor, Henry Hill, here in the studio, and by the Daily Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface, who's with us down the line. We shall be right back. Stay with us. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Prime Minister has insisted he can still win a general election despite losing 2 safe Tory seats and only narrowly holding a third. A low-emission zone in West London is blamed for the Labour Party's failure to take Uxbridge. But Sir Keir Starmer has held a huge swing in Selby and Ainsty that won the seat for his party. And tributes have been paid to the multi-award-winning American singer Tony Bennett, who's died aged 96. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Conservative Home's Deputy Editor, Henry Hill, who's here with me in the studio. And joining us down the line is the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. They'll both be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Daily Express reacts to the by-election results with a quote from the Prime Minister, Rishi. All isn't lost. Next election, not done deal. And go true blue or face wipeout, reads the Daily Mail, as it too leads on Rishi Sunak's response to the Tory by-election defeats. The Financial Times too leads with advice given to the Prime Minister by Tory MPs. The headline, Tories urge Sunak to rein in green pledges after by-election carnage. And this same sentiment is on the front of the Daily Telegraph. PM urged by Cabinet to abandon eco-policy. Sunak aims to divide and rule after poll setback, reads the front of the Times, as it also leads on the same story. And the front of the Eye Weekend is less optimistic for Conservatives, with the headline, Tories fear wipeout, with 150 MPs now facing axe. And shattering defeats for Tories in cry for change, reads the front of The Guardian, as they too lead on this story. In some other news, the captain of the Lionesses, Millie Bright, is pictured on the front of the Daily Mirror as they try to bring home the World Cup. And hellhole, reads the front of The Sun, as it looks at the queues of people trying to get away for the summer season. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Henry Hill. Welcome to you both, Henry in person.
Hi.
Lovely to meet you
and
for the first time.
Yeah.
In the
so
flesh.
Yeah.
Let's start off with the Times. And they're really suggesting that the Prime Minister is going to be looking at new strategies to prevent the losses that we've seen in the by-elections and moving forward. Henry, take us into their particular stories, saying that he's going to aim to divide and rule. How so?
Basically, the lesson that the Tories are trying to take from Uxbridge is that the way to beat Labour is to find individual wedge issues where they can put themselves on the right side. Because they've been in power for a long time, Labour are 20 points ahead in the polls. There's a general sense, I think, that a lot of voters want change. And so instead of trying to fix the whole thing, they find individual policies where Labour can be on the wrong side of public opinion and go really hard on those. That's why the Prime Minister is talking about doubling down on small boats and channel crossings. Maybe there will be other elements of the green agenda, as we've seen suggested in some of the other papers. We don't yet know what form this will take, but it suggests that as Labour firm up their policy offer, the Tories are going to be looking for ways to put themselves on the right side of the argument on that. So
to have some clear water between themselves and Labour, in essence?
Yeah, absolutely.
Susie, your thoughts are on that. I mean, one of the areas, as mentioned by Henry, that perhaps might be the green credentials and plans afoot in that respect.
Possibly, but I mean, you know, part of the reason we have a lot of green issues on the table at the moment is remember that people's back gardens actually caught fire last year. And other people's living rooms have been underwater for winter after winter. It's not like there's a load of green issues floating around and people don't care about it. All the polls show people really do care about environmental issues and they do want to fix some of these things. There's been a massive failure of communications, particularly around ULEZ and air pollution. For example, busy talking about how we're going to take allowing the Tories to talk about a tax on driving or taking your car away from you and not communicating the fact that, for example, air pollution is attributable for 20% of strokes, that it's been found in the brains of Alzheimer's patients, that it gives you cancer, that it affects children. You know, are you really suggesting, the Conservative Party or indeed anybody else, that you want children to have more asthma attacks or you want people to have more strokes and more cancer? Because that's obviously where you end up with it.
Well, nobody wants that, but I mean, Sir Keir Starmer himself.
Well, exactly, that's the thing. You've got people suggesting let's have some green policies because the world's literally on fire and people are dying, and then someone else is going, we don't want those, no, because that's expensive. So let's just not do it. There isn't really any kind of happy way in between, and it's not being communicated or sold very well to voters, which is why you had this problem in Uxbridge. But what is being suggested here in the Times is is basically just being as divisive as possible, finding every dog whistle that you can and blowing it. Now, that might work in one or two places. It might work in Dover to go on the small boats issue. It might have worked in Uxbridge to go on ULEZ. And there might be places where you can get enough people out to the ballot box because you've had a row about trans rights for some reason. But the people who are going to be aerated by these things are spread out across the country. They are not all in one place. And you are not going to find a really divisive wedge issue like that in 600 odd seats. It's not going to work on a large scale. So what this shows, if this is correct, is that the Tory party are thinking on a very small scale. They're thinking about winning a seat here or there that they might otherwise have lost, and thinking that it might come down to, you know, single figure seats in terms of who's perhaps running the government, or perhaps how much they can actually claw back if they get wiped out at the election.
Henry, what do you think to that analysis? I mean, will it boil down to the fact that ULEZ has not been particularly popular with some voters?
Yeah, so ULEZ is a strong issue for the Tories because the Tories are much stronger in Outer London. The expansion of ULEZ to Outer London is much more car dependent, so they've clearly identified that. But there aren't that many places you can do that. It's good news for the Welsh Tories, where they can run against an incumbent Labour government. Maybe the Scottish Tories can run against SNP failures. But in most of the country, there's just the Conservative government and the country. So there won't be that many issues like this where they can do a hyper-local campaign. So what Rishi Sunak seems to be trying to do is find national issues where the Tories can maybe do what they did in '92, which is not so much run on their own record as run against what Labour, or what they said Labour were proposing to do.
Let's move on to the eye, and this is a much more pessimistic take, perhaps not surprisingly. They're saying that the Conservatives could lose 150 MPs. They're suggesting they're facing the axe. That's their prediction. Susie.
Yep, and that's sort of as you take the 20-point swing, which is the average over the three by-elections, and compare that to Parliament, that's what you'd be facing, which is what it comes down to. The question of really, is Rishi Sunak, some of the Conservatives, especially the front benches when you've seen them out in the last 24 hours, seem to want to say, look, we can totally win the general election. But I think anyone with any common sense is thinking, you're probably not going to win the general election. Therefore, how can you retain as many seats as possible so that, you know, when there's 5 years down the line and another general election, or 10 years down, how quickly could you try to return to power? And that's really where the realistic and the realpolitik is how can you survive this? If they do lose 150, I mean, that is close to fatal. There's barely anything left. There'd only be a Tory rump left in the House of Commons. But you know, if it is going to be, as we've seen overnight, where Labour can win, say, the red wall back, and Lib Dems can win in the blue wall, and the Conservatives maybe can win here and there on some wedge issues and be divisive and get people to the polls that way. Interestingly, not because they like Rishi Sunak or his policies, but because they're upset about something else. Which is very much how you normally would fight it, as an opposition rather than as an incumbent government. But if they can get a few, then maybe we're looking at a minority government after the next election, and whoever, you know, is going to be the largest party in there we're going to have a period of instability, perhaps, where, you know, if Keir Starmer is leading the largest party, then has to go to the country again within a couple of years to try and get a better majority. But I'm not sure we'd actually lose 150 in one go.
Henry, if we've got Conservatives saying that they believe that's what's going to happen, that 150 MPs will lost, I mean, that indicates that they have no faith in their party or their leader.
I mean, even if they are sympathetic to Rishi Sunak, there's only so much he can do. You know, you think about the circumstances in which he came into the number 10 immediately after the Liz Truss chaos, after the Boris Johnson fiasco. Tories had tanked in the polls. He's not a magician. You can criticise elements of his strategy, but the Tories have been in power for 13 years and are 20 points behind, and there's not much scope he has really for turning that around. But absolutely, it does indicate that the Conservatives, at least many Conservatives, are now deeply pessimistic. And that's important because, as Susie says, a lot of this will depend on the strategy the Conservatives choose to take into the next election. There was a leak the other day that they were thinking of doing an 80-20 with 20 attack seats. That would be absolute madness in the face of the current polls. The Tories need to choose really carefully where they dig their trenches, where they defend, to make sure they try and come out of the next election as strong as possible so that they can be competitive in 5 years or 10 years' time.
The Mail's headline, go true blue or face wipeout. Perhaps I should ask Henry this question, but I'm going to ask Susie. counterintuitively. What is true blue?
Well, according to the Daily Mail, it's tax cuts and abandoning green issues. And that really boils down to being more like Liz Truss. And that is a very bold ask, I think, of anyone or any government. The only person who's prepared to still do sort of some of Liz Truss's policies are Liz Truss and Liz Truss's cat. So I don't, it's a bit of it's a strange front page. It's one of those things where the Tories have had a bad night. They were expecting a worse night. They thought they were going to lose Uxbridge. They haven't lost Uxbridge. They think that's some cause for optimism. And they're trying to find a way in which they can say, look, we can find a way through this. We just need to do X and it'll all be fixed. And the unicorns will fly out of the sky. And maybe if we could be more Tory, we'll cut taxes, that'll do it, won't it? And they seem to have forgotten. It wasn't even a year ago they tried cutting taxes and the whole economy got set on fire. Anyone who is seriously thinking that in the middle of what we've got at the moment, the right thing to do is to have some unfunded tax cuts and do it all again, is living in cloud cuckoo land. And they certainly shouldn't be talking to any journalists because, well, the journalists shouldn't be paying them any attention either. They're obviously lunatics.
Well, Henry, these senior Tories talking to the Mail are saying that Rishi Sunak should cut taxes and build houses, and that will lure back the voters.
I mean, the presence of build houses is absolutely incredible. I'm messianic about building houses. I think it's one of the big things the Conservatives have missed. But the reason that the Conservatives keep failing to hit house building targets is because it's deeply unpopular with Conservative voters in the blue wall and other bits of the country. Everyone's in favour of housing in principle, but the moment it's housing near them, then all of a sudden it's no, that's not suitable for our local area. So Theresa May managed to throw away the 2017 election because she proposed making asset-rich older people contribute something towards the cost of their social care. I think Rishi Sunak would do something similar if he went massive on housing, unless he was very careful about how he did it, because there's lots of shire seats which might be flirting with the Liberal Democrats. If they thought they were going to get concreted over, then the Liberal Democrats would be all over that.
Interesting. We are going to take a break, both, but do stay with us. Coming up, Boris Johnson turns his fire on the boss of NatWest over Nigel Farage controversy. We'll discuss that and more next. Do stay with us.
The whole tournament is exciting for me. I think there's been a lot more buzz around this one than France in 2019, and there was more buzz in France 2019 than there was in Canada before that. So you see that there is this growing momentum and fervour with, you know, people in this country now knowing the Lionesses' names and now being invested, and I think that just shows how exciting it is. I definitely think there's an element around legitimacy. So I think that whether that's a brand or a sponsor or even just a parent that is thinking about what to do with their daughter, I think that the fact that the Lionesses are on television and you know, winning on the highest possible stage as well, I think that shows real legitimacy that allows people to think, actually, this is a good path. This is a possible path. My daughter can enjoy it, can go and play to the highest possible level, could maybe even make a career out of it. And then the brands and the sponsors are thinking, actually, this is something that I want to invest into because it's also got the visibility that it finally deserves. We've got a number of the England under-19 squad within our squad, so I know that definitely there's a thirst and a fervour and a desire to make it into that senior team as well. I think what you really see is on the terraces. You see a lot more fans coming along because they realise that for Lewis FC, we are maybe not a big brand club, but we are in the top 2 divisions, so we're in the top 20 clubs in the country. So I think that means that people are thinking, actually, we can see elite football on our doorsteps, where I think maybe previously they'd only think that maybe the top Premier League clubs had women's teams that were worth watching. Now they understand that actually it's much broader. For us, I think this is about equal treatment and equal value. I think that when it comes to your national team, there shouldn't really be a difference between what you are paid. You're representing the same country, then you should be remunerated appropriately and equally. There are now about 6 or 7 different nations that are in disputes with their federations, and it's not just over pay. People get really wrapped up on pay, but it's also about basic treatment. There's the Jamaica team that had to crowdfund even to travel and for hotels to go to the World Cup. So it's not just about pay, and we get really hung up on that. It's about the whole package and the whole environment.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's US correspondent.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. I'm playing devil's advocate.
Mark Stone, Sky News in the United States.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Susie Boniface and Henry Hill. And we're going to start this section off by having a look at the Telegraph and a story regarding Boris Johnson. He's called on the chief executive of NatWest to resign if she's found to have leaked details of Nigel Farage's bank account to the BBC. Henry, what say you to that? Is it his place to be calling for resignations?
I mean, as a comment journalist, I suppose I have to defend the right of comment journalists to demand people's resignations. But if this chief executive had leaked private banking details to the press, that would be, I think, a fairly serious breach of some banking regulations. I don't think, though, that Boris has got any evidence that she has, which I think is a crucial sort of missing ingredient between an opinion piece and an actual story. This, of course, is down to the fact that Coutts closed Nigel Farage's bank accounts, and then there was conflicting stories about why they did that. He did a subject access request, and it turned out that it was because their reputation management committee decided he didn't align with their values. It's an important story in many respects. I think this is basically Boris Johnson trying to elbow in on it on the basis of some fairly slender allegations. If more evidence comes to light, that would be maybe significant, but there's no sign that he has any.
What do you mean elbow in on it?
It's a story that doesn't involve him, and he wants to sort of gee up the right, and it's a story that's mobilising the right. The idea of woke corporations shutting down people's bank accounts is something that is motivating the kind of Conservatives that form Boris Johnson's constituency today, and so therefore I think it's not surprising that he wants to weigh in and have something to say on it.
And Susie, he's calling for ministers to hold a leak inquiry into how the inaccurate story came to emerge.
Yeah, I don't know how on earth he would expect that to happen quite, because the government doesn't get to inquire into what a bank says to a journalist normally. That's between the bank and the journalist. And of course, the allegation is that the chief executive of the bank gave a reason to the BBC that for Nigel Farage's bank account being shut down, which turned out to be false. So if you want to say that she was leaking personal details, well, then she wasn't, if she did do that, because it was something that was false. But one of the lines in this column, is an absolute mad railing and a flight of fancy. It's talking about how this is about far more than the bank account of one person. This is about freedom under the law and the right of every British-born man to go and do and say what you believe. It's freedom of speech, blah, blah. Look, any business in this country is able to chuck people out. You can get thrown out of the chippy if the chippy thinks that you are putting people off coming into the chippy, or that you are somehow portraying an image of the chippy that isn't in the chippy's best interests. And unfortunately, what people do not seem to mention in this case is that Nigel Farage kept saying publicly that he had an account at Coutts. Had he kept his mouth shut and stopped boasting about it, he wouldn't have created any kind of reputational damage, which meant Coutts then had to put him on a regular risk review that they did annually, and that eventually found he was starting to cause a bit of a reputational problem for the bank. Now, if you want to say that the bank isn't allowed to eject Nigel Farage for having views they felt didn't align with theirs, number one, he's proved recently that he does have views that do not align with theirs. They are not in agreement about a lot of things. But then you also have to say, like, a pub landlord doesn't have a right to chuck someone out for bad behaviour, or that it doesn't have a right to say, do you know what, I just don't want to set within the law. I'm not discriminating against you for a protected characteristic, but I don't want to serve you for some reason. I don't want you in my cab. I don't want you in my chippy. I don't want you in my paper shop. Everyone's got a right to do that as a business. I run a business. I'm a freelancer. I get to say, do you know what? I don't want to work with you, Sky. I find you obnoxious. I'm not going to work with you. And that's my right. No one can say you must do it. I have no choice in the matter. Being Nigel Farage is not a protected characteristic. He should have just kept his mouth shut and we wouldn't be in this situation.
But of course, obviously, you don't think that about Sky, just for the record.
Of course not, but you know.
Just very quickly, though, on this story, Henry, the quote from Boris Johnson is about freedom under the law. That freedom made our country great. It's under threat. It is time to fight. Do you agree with that sentiment?
I mean, no, Susie is right. As the law currently stands, businesses do have the right to do this. It was established in the famous so-called gay cake case, Asher's Bakery case, that businesses don't have to serve people that they disagree with. I think there's an argument, perhaps, to the extent that banks have a very privileged role in our system. They make an awful lot of money providing essential infrastructure, but no, in general, this is not all that worrying.
Henry, thank you. And Susie, also, we'll talk about the other story regarding Boris Johnson in the 11. Let's have a look at the weather in the meantime.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the first weekend of the school holidays looks like being a washout for most as cloud, rain and strong winds spread in from the Atlantic. Traffic is expected to be heavy and road conditions tricky in places. It'll be a grey start to the day with outbreaks of rain for many. Northern Scotland is most likely to stay dry with some sunny spells. Rain will turn heavier over the high ground as the morning wears on. Winds will also freshen over Wales, the southwest and Channel counties with gusts in excess of 40 miles per hour.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.